February 15th, 2026. At the Munich Security Conference, global leaders arrived at a grim consensus. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz declared the decades-old global structure dead. Emmanuel Macron warned that Europe's security nets are gone, and it must prepare for conflict. Marco Rubio confirmed the old world has simply vanished. In the framework of economic historian Ray Dalio, this collapse places us exactly into stage 6 of his historical big cycle. Inside a functioning country, we rely on police and courts to resolve disputes. The international stage has none of those enforcement mechanisms. When the global order fractures, relations instantly revert to the law of the jungle, where raw power dictates the rules. Because human nature remains consistent, we do not have to guess what a lawless global arena looks like. We only need to examine how this exact cycle broke down the last time we reached this stage. This diagram maps out the 5 stages of international conflict. Nations rarely jump straight to gunfire. They climb an escalation ladder, moving from trade to technology to capital to geopolitical and finally military wars. Those first 4 stages operate quietly. Intense, unseen struggles over wealth and resource dominance that escalate for years before a single shot is fired. To see how this ladder functions in reality, look at the timeline immediately following the Great Crash of 1929, an event that gutted economies worldwide. Massive debt crises wiped out savings, triggering massive wealth gaps. This ruin naturally pushed divided populations toward autocratic populists who promised to restore order. Domestic financial collapse acts as the primary catalyst for global conflict. Desperate governments, struggling to keep their populations fed and employed, aggressively weaponize their foreign policies to secure their own survival. The escalation began with trade and capital wars. In 1930, the United States passed the Smoot-Hawley tariffs to protect domestic jobs. This severely restricted international trade and choked off vital income for nations already on the brink. Facing economic devastation, countries like Germany and Japan adopted the ideology of fascism. This system utilized top-down autocratic control over private capitalism, demanding that all individual output serve the collective goal of rapidly rebuilding national power. Germany forcefully directed its private industries to finance a massive military-industrial complex, masking military expansion through domestic infrastructure projects. Japan faced an even steeper geographic advantage. As an island nation lacking natural resources, it climbed into a geopolitical war, aggressively invading mainland Asia to seize the coal, iron, and oil it needed to keep its economy breathing. When nations bypass cooperative trade and extract resources through raw force, localized geopolitical skirmishes lock the world's superpowers onto an inevitable collision course. The crucial tipping point arrived in 1941. The United States heavily weaponized its capital tools against Japan by freezing their financial assets and enforcing a crippling oil embargo. This created a classic prisoner's dilemma in modern international statecraft. Japan was backed into a geopolitical corner, forced to weigh the humiliation of total submission against the risks of an existential fight. Japanese leadership calculated their oil reserves would last exactly 2 years. Waiting out the embargo was a mathematical death sentence for their military. The pressure of that economic vice resulted in Japan's preemptive strike on Pearl Harbor, forcing the conflict rapidly into the final stage, military war. Devastating shooting wars rarely begin because a leader wakes up wanting to conquer the globe. They ignite from a desperate, calculated gamble made by a power pushed entirely past its economic breaking point. This chart visualizes the trajectory of our current global landscape. We have an established power on a declining trend line and a rapidly rising rival approaching intersection. Today, the United States and China are heavily engaged in the trade, technology, and capital stages of this exact historical model. Taiwan sits exactly at the nexus of those converging lines. It is the definitive geopolitical flashpoint where these two powers are currently testing the limits of each other's influence and military resolve. Dalio's model points to a highly probable severe military collision if both nations rely on escalations that cross existential red lines. Avoiding that outcome requires both powers to maintain strong, productive domestic economies. They have to prioritize complex, negotiated concessions that allow for mutual survival, rather than attempting to choke their rival into submission. The post-1945 order is gone. The rules that governed the last 80 years no longer apply. Whether a next world order arrives through a peaceful transition or global tragedy depends entirely on whether leaders understand the historical cycle they are repeating.